second. Final one.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Fine. I was just putting together an email because I was on, but I didn't know where you were. So now you're here.
I was
Good.
trying to figure out how to record actually correctly. So
Oh, you figured that out. That was my
yeah.
indicator. I heard session is being
Is Karen
recorded.
join us?
I'm sorry, what?
Karen gonna join us?
She's all tied up with a bunch of gardening and work. It wasn't
Okay.
clear if she was supposed to be on this or not, but I don't think she was planning on it. But
Oh, okay.
I can mention a lot of her work for sure, and we can always talk again later and include her if you'd like to do that.
Okay. Yeah.
She's playing in the dirt.
Playing in the dirt. Well, that's pretty awesome, actually.
Well, I was out there for about 4 hours this morning playing in the dirt with her, but
Oh, wow. That's cool.
cleaned up for this.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah. And thank you for taking the time. Again, my friend Shaizan and I met with you at the beginning of 2022, and he wasn't able to finish the project. He's actually got a film he's taking around the world right now, winning all sorts of awards for it. And then our audio didn't sync up right. So, and then I met Alex at a Bruce Lipton event last summer.
Okay.
And I was talking to Bruce about the film and the progress of it. And I mentioned crystals, and he's like, "You need to talk to my nephew, Alex." And so then I met Alex, and he and I decided he's part of the project.
Good.
Some of the interviews with me and editing and.
Well, fantastic. That's great.
Yeah.
It's good to see you again. Last we
Yeah,
saw
good to see you too, Alex. I remember meeting you, I guess it was about 8 or 9 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, it was good
trip.
time. Yeah, absolutely. I remember we bonded over Star Trek for a little while.
Absolutely. We'll give my best to Bruce when you talk to him.
Yeah.
All right.
I will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
So one of the things, like when we interviewed Shaizan and I interviewed you the last time, we didn't really talk a lot about your background. And I think it would be really important because the things that have been explored in this film are, some people consider them really out there, to be polite. And so with not a science, they're so science oriented. And so it would be really good to hear a little bit more about your journey from the science and medical field.
Sure.
To
Absolutely.
this other space that you're in. So.
Well, good. Yeah. Well, it's all ultimately for me, it's got to be scientific or I don't know what to make of it. So this is definitely a scientific revolution that is happening right now.
Amen.
We can dive into all that. And I can certainly cover some of the material, that's Karen's main vector. That is the binaural beat brainwave entrainment, sacred acoustics. I can talk a lot about that.
Yeah. That sounds really good. So at a young age, when did you know you wanted to be a doctor?
Well, my father was a neurosurgeon. That clearly had a lot to do with it, but it was a lot more kind of back and forth than you might imagine. And my sisters and I all kind of worshiped my dad growing up. He was such a wonderful guy, and he loved his patients and his residents and took excellent care of his patients. And he was just a real positive influence on me for my entire life. And yet he also had a very strong belief in God and power of prayer. He had no doubt whatsoever about that. And yet he was also fully versed in Big Bang cosmology and modern physics and neuroscience. Clearly, he was the head of a neurosurgical training program. So for him, it was always smooth sailing, no conflict at all. For me, growing up in a scientific household, I always knew science was the pathway to truth. And I've kind of oscillated in terms of my ability to readily see how to assimilate this kind of bigger spiritual knowledge with my scientific knowledge. And what it demands is a much richer kind of understanding of quantum physics and what quantum physics is telling us about the nature of reality. But that, of course, is where we go in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is consolidating neuroscience, philosophy of mind, all the evidence for non-local consciousness in parapsychology, like telepathy, remote viewing, things like that. And of course, quantum physics, which is that giant elephant in the room that's been demanding a better explanation for a century. And we're finally getting there. So, but it has everything to do with the relationship between the brain and the mind and the nature of reality. And that's why I consider this all an incredibly fascinating journey of discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing time to be on the planet. That's for sure.
It is.
So you had a near-death experience.
Right.
Before the near-death experience, were you open to these other concepts, or were you, where were you in your thought process?
I would say before my coma, I was open to many things, including things spiritual. But for me, it had to have a scientific origin. I was not going to pay any attention to something that didn't have, a deep kind of linkage through science and scientific investigation. But that's exactly where we find ourselves with quantum physics and the nature of reality and this thing we call consciousness. It's not simply derivative from the brain, and it's not just localized where our body is in a here and a now with a sense of self. Our consciousness can be far, far grander than that. We're basically sharing the mind of the universe, and we're all sharing it. That's the other interesting thing, is we're all in this together. And that's why near-death experiences are such a crucial part of the puzzle, because they insist we must pay attention to this binding force of love and to kindness and compassion and all the other rules that are revealed in the life reviews of near-death experiences. And the interesting thing when you study life reviews deeply, for example, as Bruce Grayson has, he's a skeptical psychiatrist who's been studying near-death experiences for over 45 years. And I know that he summarized almost 700 life reviews in his database in the fall of 2021 in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. And very amazing facts. One was that almost 50% of these life review reports were like reliving, not remembering, but reliving the events. And something like 30% of his patients said their entire life was involved in the life review. And that sounds odd, except when you realize that the very fact that this is a reliving of events tells you that birth, death, everything in between is accessible to you in that spiritual level. And that should give you a pretty big indicator of how powerful this whole mechanism is. And it's completely outside of time. That's my point. It's not slave to Earth time at all. And the other crucial thing that he pointed out in that report on his almost 700 life reviews in his database is, I think it was about 74% of them reported that it was like reliving the events, but from the perspective of everybody involved, not just your own. And that's so important. That's why we often say the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe. Wow. If 3/4 of people who report life reviews and NDEs report it being visualized from all different perspectives. So if you've been busy handing out pain and suffering to other people, you have to receive all that during the life review. And so generally the life review nudges us towards caring for each other, because nobody likes to be treated, in a ragged fashion like that. And this is all about how we should get along through basically the science of consciousness that is saying that we're all truly bound together through this one mind. And in these processes of life reviews and, the big picture items that demonstrate our existence as eternal souls and as souls that are connected with others and connected with the universe at large in terms of purpose and meaning, it shifts everything. And it's no longer that bleak and paltry fiction of materialism where we pretend that we're separate beings. And of course, a lot of that thinking from the 20th century was at the same time that they were debating Darwinian selection and survival of the fittest and competition. And they kind of missed the mark. Some of the militant atheist arm of scientists who claimed that survival of the fittest was merely competition and that nothing else was involved. Any biologist today will tell you that it's all about collaboration and cooperation, not just all this huge focus on competition and a zero-sum game and that there's this lack of abundance. No, there's a lot more available to us, as sentient beings to understand all this. But certainly,
I think you mentioned something about Darwin talked about love more than survival.
That was in his book, The Descent of Man, where he actually used the phrase survival of the fittest twice. And he uses the word love 98 times.
Wow.
So it wasn't his desire to go crashing away from, this kind of sense of being in this together and taking care of each other, but it was, there were other very militant evolutionists like Huxley, not Aldous, but Thomas Huxley, who I think was his uncle, who was a very militant atheist kind of, competition, that's it. It's only competition. Nothing else matters. But that's really not the truth of the matter. And any biologist today will tell you that collaboration and cooperation between members of a species and between species is really the dominant pattern of interaction that you see, not this silly little postulated competition with only the fittest surviving. And, it's led us with a lot of the social systems, financial, economic, governing systems taking their cue from the mid-20th century science. They kind of missed the gate on this, thinking it was all about the competition. And this is why it's so important to realize that the current version of kind of mind-brain relation and the science of consciousness emerging from all of this hard work and study is one that promotes the one mind. As we discuss in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, that whole chapter 5 is all about the primordial mind hypothesis, that we're all sharing that God mind. And that's what happens when we leave the physical body once and for all, is those boundaries that we think are so solid in life between our mental experience and that of others starts to blur. That's why people, in the dying process in an NDE, you often have them connecting with souls of people who are still alive. In fact, there's a whole category of what are called shared death experiences, where the soul of a departing person will actually take along the soul of a loved one. They could be 1,000 miles away, doesn't matter, but it's called a shared death experience. And I've heard many of them from my audience members. Raymond Moody actually wrote a book about shared death experiences. It's called Glimpses of Eternity. I think it came out in 2011. But also now William Peters from Santa Barbara has really taken on the mission of studying shared crossing experiences. So if you Google Shared Crossing Project and William Peters, you'll find a tremendous amount of evidence that people can actually cultivate a situation where they're more likely to have their soul be whisked along if a loved one is leaving the physical plane, even to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review of that departing soul before they come back to this world. And shared death experiences are an incredibly powerful addition to the whole near-death experience literature, because they have identical qualities to near-death experiences, but they happen in people who are generally very healthy and normal, family members, sometimes healthcare workers who are involved in taking care of someone. In fact, William Peters' very first kind of spiritual experience back in, I think, the 80s, when he was first doing work in hospice out in California, was he had an experience of bilocation where he was reading with a dying AIDS patient. And then all of a sudden, both of them had their souls up in the top of the room, looking down on their bodies with, William reading to this patient, but both of them are witnessing, oh my God, we're out of our bodies together, witnessing this thing going on below us. And that's what got William, oh my God, into this whole work. To have some striking experience like that. So anyway, there's a tremendous amount of work that expands far beyond near-death experiences to show the reality of them.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a fascinating idea. I had not heard about the shared death experience. What would your thoughts be, or your feelings on maybe because of course the mechanism is extremely important, and I know you think about that a lot. What do you think possibly the mechanism or the reason or purpose for a shared death experience could be in your?
Well, I think the purpose it serves, or the function it serves, is very clearly to make it crystal clear to other people that this NDE reportage is absolutely smack on target, that it's real. It's a phenomenon that proves the reality of a spiritual realm. And so when people come back from a shared death experience, or oh my God, to go through that. But the thing that's so beautiful about it is it's also a perfect example of how the biggest and most important lessons to learn from near-death experiences are not just what happens when we die, but who are we and why are we here? What is this all about? Once you realize that your soul can accompany another soul during their NDE to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review in that realm that is completely outside of space and time. If you're allowed to see birth, death, and everything in between simultaneously, I hope you recognize what the universe is setting up there. That is quite extraordinary, far beyond just, oh, it's kind of like this world, but a little different. No, it's not. It's a realm where when you are that much out of time, you experience everything at once. It makes so much more sense. You can connect the dots, and your whole life starts to make far more sense when you have this vision that can encompass every moment, birth to death, and everything in between, and you're witnessing those events simultaneously. A lot of the important connections between them start to be revealed that are not so apparent when you're living it forward in this little narrative, following the slow and plodding river of time in the material world. So it's big instruction to have this expanded view. And this is one of the reasons why I'm highly recommending to everyone at every turn meditation, centering prayer, going within. The more you start to explore your own consciousness, the more you'll start to realize all of this makes sense. Your consciousness is much more than just, some little phenomenon being kind of dreamt up by a 3.5-pound gelatinous mass floating in a warm, dark between your ears. It's much grander than that. You're really sharing the mind of the universe. And that's what all of this is about, is coming to this bigger recognition of who we are, what this is all about, what's the potential for any individual human being to make sense of this and to grow within this kind of environment and this knowledge base of potential, exploration of your intellect and your mind and your emotional kind of self. And I'll remind people, it's far beyond the little ego mind. This is about your higher soul, and that's a part of you that expands tremendously when you leave the physical body at the time of bodily death. Mm-hmm. And this is about cultivating your relationship with your higher soul, which turns out to be using that God force, that God mind of the universe, just to exist. And all of us share that property. But the more we realize that our mind is only a little eddy current that's been dissociated from the main primordial consciousness, that God mind, the more we can wake up to all this. And the other thing to point out is not only when people are dying do they have access to loved ones at a distance, through their mental interaction with someone at a distance, like in a shared death experience, but also, of course, they have access to the souls of those who have left the physical plane, to loved ones who have died. In fact, Gregory Shushan, who has written extensively on near-death experiences in Aboriginal and primitive cultures, says the most common feature of the NDE in those cultures is the soul of a departed loved one making an appearance and escorting them over. So that is extremely common. And then when some people complain, oh, near-death experiencers don't really die. I want to know what happens when you really die. Well, for that, all you have to do is go to the work of Christopher Kerr. He's a hospice doctor in Buffalo, New York. He wrote a beautiful book about 4 years ago. It's called Death is But a Dream. It's all about hospice and terminal care. And in hospice and terminal care, these are not people who are primarily NDE reporters. These are people who are dying. in a terminal care setting. And the very same things happen in 86% of his patients had a very convincing end of life dream or vision. Dream if it occurred while they were asleep, vision if it occurred while they were awake, but they have very similar characteristics. And 86% of his patients had a very convincing such experience at the end of their life that let them know, the loved one is really there. This is really, I'm entering a realm of eternal life. And not only that, 99% of that group of 86% who had such experiences, 99% said they were more real than anything they'd ever experienced in their life.
Wow.
So it's not some vague, murky, dream or hallucination. These are sharp, strong, powerful, concrete. They change your life. I've had people come up to me after I gave a talk about my experience and say, I've never shared this with anybody else but. And then they'll share a similar, either a shared death or a near death or an after death communication. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those stories are 50 years old. And they say the story has never changed in their mind. It's these things change your life forever. And they also do not fade. These are not dreams or hallucinations.
Real experience.
Yeah. What would you, say, like, because you and Karen have a company called Sacred Acoustics?
That's Karen's company. I'm actually not part of that company, but I'm one of their alpha testers just because
yeah, that's what I want to know about, because somebody watching this that's more left brain, how can they use, how do you use the are they called meditations that are available?
Sacred Acoustics, we call them audio files or tones, listening to tones is what I often put it. And the key thing to explain to your audience about Sacred Acoustics, and you can learn a lot at sacredacoustics.com, but that's the company that Karen Newell, my partner and the co-author of the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we wrote that together. But her business partner is a guy named Kevin Cossey. He's a mechanical engineer in New York City who taught himself audio engineering, and now he generates incredibly powerful binaural beat brainwave entrainment. And I've worked with them as kind of their alpha tester to help test each one of these products to bring it up to full speed and to market. But I was originally attracted to binaural beats way back 2 years post-coma. I had read about 150 books on quantum physics, on spiritual traditions, East and West, of trying to come to a deeper understanding of my own experience. And I came to realize that I could read all the books and go to all the talks and lectures till the cows come home. But ultimately, if I really wanted to get it, I had to be exploring my own consciousness. So I knew I had to start meditating. And I heard at that time about binaural beats. It was a phenomenon discovered in the mid-1800s by a Prussian physicist, a guy named Wilhelm Heinrich Dove. And I remember I read an article about this in Scientific American. I think it was in October of 1974, autumn of 73 or 74. But it was about binaural beats in the brain is the title of that article. And it was by a guy named Gerald Oster. And it was very informative. And it talked all about the neuroanatomy and the lower brainstem. To me, it was fascinating because every sound you've ever heard, every chant, anthem, hymn that might have generated some transcendental state of conscious awareness, those are all processed up in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes, circuits that have basically evolved in Homo sapiens and primates in the last 2 or 3 million years. Very different is the situation with the circuits you're interacting with Sacred Acoustics and binaural beats in general. Those circuits are down on the lower brainstem. They are circuits that arose more than 300 million years ago, before mammals even walked this earth. I think they actually were originally there as a localization circuit, so that when you hear a sound snap behind your head, for example, that circuit, the superior olivary nucleus, calculates exactly where that sound is coming from because of the arrival time of the two sound waves going 1,000 feet per second. But that timing circuit is accurate to tens of microseconds. So it is actually able to calculate where the sound comes from, but that's not what we're using it for. What we're using it for is to drive an oscillation down in the lower brainstem. You've heard of people using a pendulum, for example, for hypnotic induction,
Yeah.
and having somebody's eyes follow the pendulum back and forth. That's using the lower brainstem. Well, in that case, you're using the midbrain, which is above the level I'm talking about with sacred acoustics. But anyway, you're using the midbrain to oscillate. And that is what somehow this kind of oscillation in the neuronal networks of the lower brainstem is what allows us to get into these deep states of transcendental awareness. And I would say that's where we have to go to really get a reliable kind of reconnection of that dissociation of our apparent individual mind from the group mind, from the consciousness of the universe. But
Mhm.
by doing this, by learning how to just ride these tones, which I've been doing an hour or two a day for the last 11 or 12 years, is an incredibly powerful way to get into deep states of meditation where you are traversing that veil very routinely and getting more in touch with that primordial mind. And that's what allows you to get in touch with aspects of yourself, of your soul, that are not stuck in a here and now, but are
Mhm.
much grander than that. So for me, meditation, especially using something as powerful as sacred acoustics, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah.
It's a
You know what I think
fantastic
what's
technique.
good about that too, Eben, is like I hear like, so there's, you can go on YouTube and look at these sites, right? Or whatever people, but you don't know really what you're listening to. Like
Well,
I've heard different things in there. Sometimes it could be really positive or not. And so I think that's what's great about having a company like, Karen's is
yeah.
you can really trust the what you're listening to, right?
Well, you're right. And it's not just trusting what you're listening to. It turns out, for example, Karen and Kevin and Sacred Acoustics does not even offer Sacred Acoustics on iTunes Store because iTunes Store absolutely insists on compression. If you compress these audio files, you start getting rid of some of the most effective frequencies. Same thing with YouTube. If you download binaural beats from YouTube, forget about it. You haven't tried binaural beats. They chop out way too much of the important frequencies and all this data compression, so everything will fit on these servers. But you're losing it. So it's important to go right to the source. Sacred Acoustics, they have a great app on the iTunes, on the Apple Store that is incredibly good. I use that app all the time. And it's an excellent way to listen to these things. Or download them from the Sacred Acoustics website, but do not get them from YouTube. Do not, anything that's there on the iTunes store is going to be compressed, so you might as well throw it away. It's not going to be very valuable.
Wow.
But by using the real original stuff, you can really go for it. And in our society, there's a lot of anxiety. And Sacred Acoustics, there was a group of psychiatrists in New York who was so impressed with how beneficial Sacred Acoustics was for her patients that she did a pilot study, which is published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. It came out in February of 2020. It's by Dr. Anna Yusim, Y-U-S-I-M, and it's all about using Sacred Acoustics to alleviate anxiety. And what she found, to cut to the chase, is that her patients had a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms over 2 weeks of listening to Sacred Acoustics, compared to an only 7% reduction in anxiety symptoms in people who got standard talk psychotherapy for anxiety during those 2 weeks. So 7% in those with standard therapy, 26% in those listening to Sacred Acoustics tones. Pretty darn powerful. And all that is there available. And also I'll point out that the set of files used for that study is called the Whole Mind Bundle. And Karen, early in the pandemic, when all this came out, and she realized she had a powerful tool to alleviate anxiety, and we knew the pandemic was bringing on tons of anxiety and economic trouble, anxiety, et cetera. So she dropped the price of the Whole Mind Bundle to $19, which is a great price. But in addition, because of the economic collapse and people not having jobs at all, she also left a free option. So when you get to Whole Mind Bundle on sacredacoustics.com, you can still download it for free if you're in economic hardship. We trust people who can pay the $19 will pay, but if you can't, Karen's gift to the world is a free button on that Whole Mind bundle. So anybody can go grab these things and start working with them.
Wow.
Finances are no longer an excuse.
Yeah,
So anyway.
exactly. Well, that's right. I mean, it's all about being in service, right? And
Yeah.
have
Right.
balance of experience and energy, and recognizing that when there's value to something, if you have an opening there, you can receive something beautiful. So yeah, that definitely
Exactly.
thank you, and to thank you to Karen for that as well.
Well, absolutely. I'll pass that on, but she's a real sweetheart. No surprise that she's giving big gifts like that to the world. But if you try it out, you'll see what I mean. The stuff is extremely powerful and helpful. And of course, not just for anxiety. It works incredibly well for journeying, astral projection, for encountering souls of departed loved ones, for connecting with spirit guides, for really, any kind of getting to higher soul work and escaping the insanity of your ego.
Love
Or
that.
people, the ego is right there, the heart of all addictions. The ego is not your friend in these kind of spiritual journeys, but there's a facet of you, your higher soul, that is much more connected with the universe. That can scoff at the little petty games of the ego. Leave it in the dust, because there is a part of you that is far grander and wiser, and is also eternal. It's the part of you that expands when the brain and body come to an end.
Mm-hmm. Is in your book, Living in a Mindful Universe, I haven't read it, but do you have exercises in there as well? Like, so if somebody's looking, like, why would somebody pick up that book?
Well, it has a lot of practical guidance. So in other words, Living in a Mindful Universe is two very major things. One thing is it's a powerful dose of unification of science and spirituality in the modern era, given all the scientific aspects of neuroscience, the hard problem of consciousness, philosophy of mind, with the binding problem, all the non-local consciousness from parapsychology, telepathy, remote viewing, of course, NDEs, and that huge category of parapsychology, past life memories in children indicative of reincarnation, out of University of Virginia, where they have more than 1,700 cases that they've actually solved over the last 6 decades, where they actually found the person described.
Wow.
So all of that blends in the book. But
Cool.
then beyond that, we go into practical guidance with discussing the nuts and bolts of sacred acoustics, of binaural beat brainwave entrainment. We give a lot of concrete examples of our personal experiences of using these kind of meditative techniques to make significant gains in our own lives and in the lives of many people in our workshops, things like that. So it's a big blend of the science, spirituality, blending from a modern intellectual perspective, but also a tremendous amount of information to help people in their personal journey. Now, to really get to the answer to your question, that's Living in a Mindful Universe, which I highly recommend. But in addition, there is a companion workbook that goes with Living in a Mindful Universe. This workbook is free, and it's on ebenalexander.com. As soon as you get to my website, you'll find your 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. That's the workbook.
Cool.
And that is what has a tremendous amount of practical guidance for people interested in all of these topics, and especially for learning about meditation and how to do it yourself, because that 33-day journey is a 33-day email drip campaign where each day you get a major topic from Living in a Mindful Universe that we discuss briefly, but then there are all these comments that people have left about their own experiences. And more than 12,000 people have taken that course to date. And many of them have left their own comments and helped each other. So there's a giant community forming within the 33-day journey. But the whole thing is free. You get a bunch of sacred acoustics files included with that. A lot of specific instruction about meditation and meditative techniques. So I highly recommend the 33-day journey. And even people who are not reading Living in a Mindful Universe right now, who might just be considering it, go ahead and jump into that workbook. It's totally free. You'll get a lot of sacred acoustics, a lot of practical advice for meditation, and it talks about some of the big, incredibly fascinating kind of scientific topics of this whole discussion of consciousness.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for that. And 33, that's a pretty powerful number to
It is.
embrace on this experience with.
No accident there.
Yeah, I had a feeling there wasn't one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you,
well, we
you
just wanted
mentioned,
to help people with all this, and
no,
that
it's
30-day
great.
journey is very helpful.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. The 33, I'm remembering, you mentioned that there was a study that was, wasn't a study, it was a contest that the Bigelow Institute did.
Exactly.
And then there were, like, it was a huge, like, I don't know, $1 million or something, a lot of publicity for it.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
mentioned 33. I remember in the last time, because I had never heard of the Bigelow Institute, but
Uh-huh.
they were curious about the afterlife. And it was an essay contest. And you said to me there were 33 essays.
Actually, it turns out it gets a little more detailed and complex than that, but I'll briefly explain it.
Yeah.
But they were originally going to give out 3 monetary awards, but the quality of the essays was so good, and they demanded that you had to show at least 5 years experience in research in the afterlife from a scientific perspective. You had to demonstrate that before you could even submit an essay. But in
Oh,
that context, they received 204 essays. Originally, we're going to give out 3 monetary awards. The prize money was around $1 million. I don't recall the exact.
mhm.
But anyway, the essays were so good, they ended up accepting 29 of them.
Oh, okay.
So there are 29 essays at bigelowinstitute.org. They're all available for free. They're all different directions. There are many different ways you can prove the reality of the afterlife, not just near-death experiences or shared death. There are all kinds of ways you can prove it. For example, Bernardo Kastrup has an essay in there that's completely based on modern accepted science, quantum physics and science.
Hmm.
And it's a beautiful essay. Pim van Lommel won second place. He wrote an incredibly powerful scientific essay based on near-death experiences. Julie Beischel from windbridge.org wrote a very scientific essay on the study of mediumship. And there are multiple others. Dean Radin, many other scientists submitted winning essays there that I can highly recommend. And when you read them, you'll realize this is no longer a question as to whether or not the afterlife is real based on scientific data. It absolutely is. We just need to understand a little bit more about how things like the afterlife and reincarnation work. But their presence in humanity is beyond any reasonable doubt whatsoever when you review all this information. And the Bigelow Institute essays are an incredibly powerful contribution to proving the reality of the afterlife and reincarnation from all different manner perspectives. And I would encourage people just to dive in and start reading those essays. Jeffrey Mishlov's first place essay is absolutely stunning, beautifully done with a lot of embedded videos. So if you read it directly, downloaded from the bigelowinstitute.org website, you get all the videos in addition. So it's a real journey of eye-opening and awakening.
That's cool. Yeah, I think a lot of this, I don't know, like Alex and I have talked about, like, this sense, like, what are we, do we go on? There's a lot of people experience a lot of grief when somebody passes, there is the missing of the physical. And even if you're kind of spiritual and real and have a sense of knowing that somebody goes on, there's a lot of pain in that absence.
Well, there is, and that's why this is all so important, is because the souls of those who've left their body are not gone from this world, and they're not unavailable to us. So if one is bereaved, there are ways to connect the dots so they start to realize that their loved one is not absent from their life. And in fact, these connections are very important in living our lives. To know that we have an ongoing connection with loved ones who've left the physical world can be very reassuring. And in fact, to this day, I use my adoptive father. His soul appeared to me in a meditation about 2.5 years after my coma. I explain that whole story in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And he makes it clear why he couldn't be apparent to me, as he used the word, and it's kind of a double entendre sense. He could not be apparent to me, because if he had been, during my NDE, he had passed over 4 years earlier. But if he had been, in spite of the fact I had a 1 in 10 million diagnosis, E. coli meningitis in an adult, very rare, and a 1 in a billion recovery. I mean, as the medical case report on my medical records makes crystal clear, my survival was very unexpected, and especially my full recovery. That's unprecedented in the medical literature. But all of this helps us to understand kind of the much deeper aspects of our connection to souls of departed loved ones, and that they're really not departed. They may have left the physical plane, but we're always connected with them in these beautiful ways. And that's why I meditate on a regular basis, is to maintain those kind of connections as best I can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna, just to circle back, you know, you came into my space at the beginning of this, what would turn out to be this project, and I missed going to see you at Fountain. It was in Fountain Hills, Arizona, near Scottsdale. And when Shaizan, my friend who's the filmmaker, was visiting me, and I said, I have this curiosity around what do crystals do in our energy field? And the universe guides us really well. And they guided me to this woman who had been doing aura photography for over 20 years. And I said, can I bring some crystals, and can we just play around and take some pictures? And so when Shaizan was visiting, we went to meet her. And I'm just gonna hold up a little board here that's got, this was my first picture. She didn't expect anything to change in my auric field.
Right.
So she said, oh, I always tell people they can leave their jewelry on. So I was like, do I take my jewelry off? You know, no, it's not going to do anything. And this is what happened when I brought a large rose quartz into the field. Yeah.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah. And she was shocked. So that was like, then I was really curious, right? And so, and I think if Shaizan hadn't have been with me, I wouldn't even have thought to have made a film. So everything kind of lines up the way that it should. And then you circled back into my experience. I suddenly saw an interview on YouTube you were doing, and you talked about your sister that you didn't know you had, that was part of your NDE.
Right.
And that often when people take pictures of you speaking, there's a purple orb, because we saw orbs in these fields. And then I knew I have to talk to him. You know?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I would tell that story, and I'd told that story hundreds of times in public. And every time I'd tell it, I'd get very misty-eyed and tearful. And it was just so emotional for me to share that. But it was only after I started receiving pictures from people in the audience who would take pictures of me up on stage, and they just noticed that if they took the picture and it was during that time when I had Betsy up on the screen and I'm talking about my beloved birth sister, if they took the picture then, there was often this big, solid, brilliant purple or white orb right beside me. And I started realizing the reason I was getting misty-eyed is because Betsy is right there with me. Not just I'm feeling that the story is, you know, emotionally driven, but wow, she's right there. So, and she's gotten to be quite a companion too in my meditative adventures. So I invoke Betsy's help, especially when I need, say, especially strong healing for someone else. I just draw Betsy into the conversation.
Yeah.
She's very good at that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Amazing.
Any other thoughts on that? Or?
Just that, the direct personal experience of this. I feel like that would, in everything that you've been explaining and through your sharing of this, is really powerful, because, you know, it's like, I feel like a lot of people have intellectual or thinking like thoughts about this, but it's one thing to think it and hear it. Like you said too, you can read all the books you want on this. But it's not the same as having the personal experience of it. So having that feeling or sensation that we are not alone, that we are always together, is a really powerful thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's very helpful. And this is why, you know, meditation, encouraging people to get in meditation and centering prayer is so important, because that's how you leave that little ego voice behind. You know, the ego voice can make a statement, ask a question, make a request, what have you, but then my ego voice goes into timeout. And I've learned to just ride the sacred acoustics tones. And if you listen to them, you'll see what I mean. But they have this kind of wavering characteristic to them. And I just go in there and focus on breathing and the tones. And before I know it, I'm far gone, from here, now, and sense of self, and off into the realm where the universe is showing me what I need to know for the here and now.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
it's a
I've
great.
seen some interviews with, sorry to interrupt you. I've seen some interviews with Karen where they play them. Now I know it wasn't really hearing them because it was on YouTube.
Right.
I'll have to purchase some. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or just check out those downloads from Sacred Acoustics, and I'm sure she'd be happy to share other tones if you're interested. But just take a look through her website and start experimenting with the stuff. And the app, as I said, is very well designed. You can make playlists, so I can do multiple tone files in order, things like that. So I'll often mix a whole delta, whole theta with Heart Center 2 or Golden Light or Know Thyself or Spiral of Time or Water. I mean, these are all incredibly powerful meditative files, and you can really, these could last you for years and years of active exploration.
Yeah. I have another question, if I may, just with thank you for your time, of course.
Yeah.
And with all of this amazing experience and shifting, thinking about time, which is something that's super fascinating to me, and the way that we perceive time, what is time itself, and how it's linear, how, let's just say linearly, in the past, we may have been in a different state of mind where this is so foreign to us, maybe we're not thinking about anything about this. Oh, it's not real. That's just your imagination, where now we're starting to bridge that gap and start to have these experiences and share in this. My question to you is, what would you think, or what is your vision or feeling of where we're going in this linear time, temporal speak we have? What's it look like? Is there a purpose to this, and where are we going in this?
Well, I think there is, and I think it's actually kind of a group awakening more than anything. I mean, to me, it's fascinating. I look at all this in a very scientific way, and the connection between brain and mind, getting right to the root of it. But interesting is that the science and the deep study of these kind of phenomena over the last century or so is really opening the door to this notion of one mind and one consciousness, that we're all connected through the binding force of love through that. And it turns out that kind of deep truth of oneness, of connectedness, and of our spiritual nature, that goes back thousands of years. Spiritual traditions, East and West, have gotten this answer right way back in the past. And it's interesting now that with quantum physics and with neuroscience and philosophy of mind, you can start really kind of outlining the reality of what we're studying here and what its structure is. And it looks for all the world like what, these mystics and sages from, 2,000 and 3,000 years ago were describing, of oneness and love and all of that. I mean, that turns out to be the answer. And materialism, scientific materialism, which had its big heyday, especially in the 20th and early 21st century, was trying to paint one picture, but it was a picture that was woefully inadequate because it pretended we were all separate. And so separate, meat robots with our separate brains and separate kind of mental experiences. But that's not true at all. The brain is working more as a transceiver or filter to allow primordial unified mind to come into us as a little eddy current of dissociated consciousness. And yet it's not really ever separate from that God mind that we reunite with. That's what NDEs are all about. That's why they're so comforting. That's why people realize that when you die, it's not the end. It's actually a transition. It's a moving to a higher level, really. And then, of course, when the other thing that's important to mention in this discussion, especially along the lines of the reincarnation literature, which is so strong, it's one of the strongest pieces of scientific evidence for the kind of eternity of soul and grander mode of consciousness that we're all sharing. But important to point out that, that false sense of separation that comes from materialism is deadly. You combine that with a kind of a militaristic Darwinian interpretation of evolution, in the survival of the fittest in competition, and you wind up with a world that's very unlike the deeper world of shared consciousness and awareness, where love really is the most important thing, that binding force of love. And so we're really trying to reverse the absolute worst features of materialism and its false sense of separation. Of course, in the modern era, combine that with, say, political polarization. You get a lot of antagonism and a lot of kind of militant materialists who are fighting all of us off, and yet it's not even a true story. That's a false narrative. The true story is one that emerges from NDEs and from this broader literature that says, no, we're sharing one mind and we're all in this together. And it's all about the binding force of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, when necessary, forgiveness. And those are the ingredients of soul.
Amen.
Yeah, it's almost when
the key is it's important because this narcissism and egocentrism of this materialist group is threatening to destroy this world. Warfare, violence, conflict, every bit of it is greatly, you're fanning the flames with this kind of materialist sense of false sense of separation. And when you realize, no, the science of consciousness actually says that we're all in this together. We're connected through mind. We have a lot of shared meaning and purpose. Then you realize, well, we're being hoodwinked by a lot of the political and materialist forces out there today. And that includes a lot of the media, the science writers. They don't have the courage to go this far. You'll find these articles about NDEs and all, and they'll do a little compromise, and then at the end they'll seem favorable, but they don't want to make the leap like we do in Living in a Mindful Universe to go full force into, well, materialism is completely wrong. The brain is absolutely not creating consciousness. This is a much bigger story of primordial mind and each and every one of us being connected through that. And that implies that we need to behave differently and have different kind of sense of goals and meanings in our lives. But it's all about helping the highest good for all involved. And that's what I think is the shift that we need for this planet to save ourselves from our very worst impulses, like climate change. I mean, climate change is corporate greed. I can show you an article from the year 1912 where somebody in the New York Times wrote an article and said that if we keep burning carbon-based fuels, and they actually had a number for how many billions of tons were being burned every year back in the early 1900s. But they said, if we keep doing this, the planet will warm. There's no question. Carbon dioxide, very stable molecule, it will warm the planet until it becomes too hot to live in. And that was predicted back in 1912. So, and the scientists working for the energy industry, they've known this, but they kind of pretend it's not true because that profit motive is giant and they've been making a ton of money. But they actually should be paying a lot of that money back now to undo a lot of this damage they've done, because they are absolutely threatening. There are like 1 million species on this planet that are now threatened with extinction. And a lot of that is due to climate change. Of course, there's pollution and other factors. There's elimination of natural habitats, et cetera. There are a bunch of other ways other than just pure climate change. But a lot of activities of modern humans are threatening extinction of millions of species that have taken literally hundreds of millions of years to evolve. And what in the world are we doing driving them to extinction off this planet through our madness and our narcissistic greed for profit motive for energy companies?
And our belief in being separate from the earth, separate from nature, is only perpetuating this type of behavior. Because if we see ourselves as separate, we're going to treat the earth like a commodity or something that is meant to be taken or used. But if we're in a better relationship, and I think you, more than a lot of people, and as you know, a lot of people have this experience, how quickly the entire ecosystem, internally and collectively in nature, how quickly that can all transform right back into a healthy, stable way.
Absolutely. We saw that during the early pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, in the first few weeks of the pandemic, like in Kathmandu, they could see the Himalayas for the first time in years.
Los Angeles too, you know, the smog went away.
Exactly. The smog cleared up, and the fish in Venice, they could see the fish again. They disappeared because the water was so dirty. Literally within a few weeks, exactly as you say, the world was starting to heal itself. And that's really what we need to do now, is allow this world to heal. The other important aspect of this discussion on consciousness is that animals and plants are part of that one mind of the universe. That God mind of the universe includes all of our fellow beings. And I think ultimately what that will do is it will alter the way we humans proceed with our food practices. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, animals eating animals is part of the natural order. And our digestive system is one of an omnivore, not of an herbivore or a carnivore. But I think that especially the way we treat animals with the caging, no free rein, you know, every bit of how they're treated is a violation of what we're finding out about our spiritual nature and how that spiritual nature is shared with our animal friends. So we're really going to come down to a reckoning in terms of how we proceed forward with better treatment of our fellow dwellers on this planet.
I think there is a movement though towards, you know, going back to smaller farms and people understanding the importance of soil and how the soil contributes to, you know, the quality of, you know, the nutrient density and stuff of our food and things. So I do feel like there's a shift happening.
Oh, I think so
maybe
too.
more people are listening to Sacred Acoustics.
Well, I hope so.
And opening
that's
up
helping.
understanding, huh?
Well, I think it certainly would help. So that's one of the reasons Karen's been so busy getting Sacred Acoustics out there to the world. It does help people a lot.
Yeah.
And I think overall it's going to help the world.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
The only other question I have, and maybe you already answered it, but you know, like, how would you define, what's your definition of consciousness?
Well, consciousness is simply awareness of existence. And, you know, they made a big mistake back in the 20th century mulling these kind of things over, especially with quantum physicists beginning to realize consciousness seemed to be fundamental. They would think, but wait a minute, how can it be fundamental if we had to wait for human consciousness to evolve? What they don't realize is that sentient beings borrow consciousness from the universe. Conscious awareness, self-awareness, is a property of the universe itself. And we have access to that through this primordial mind. So it's a completely different way of looking at it. And then also that what that does is it forces us to acknowledge that there are multiple realms of activity. So you have this material realm and a lot of things going on there, but then you have spiritual realms that involve, for example, the dream space, psychedelic drug experience space, those kind of things that are pretty close to this material world, but they're definitely in the mental and spiritual side. And then, of course, you can move beyond all that. But it turns out that the realization that there are multiple realms that we can inhabit as sentient beings, including several different levels of spiritual realms, going all the way out to that core that I saw, that that complete oneness with the divine in that core realm, a pretty hard concept to convey. And yet it felt the most kind of like my spiritual home that I'd ever been in. So journeying and exploring these kind of realms, meditation, centering prayer, can be a very valuable tool to help each and every one of us come to these deeper truths, and also certainly how better to live these lives. You know, again, it's not just what happens when we die that NDEs are so informative about, but how do we live this life, and how do we make choices every day with every breath in thinking about ourselves and our own activities and how we interrelate with our fellow beings and what we want to do for the higher good. I mean, all of this involves a kind of a reworking of our sense of identity, who we are, especially rising up and beyond the little petty ego self, and coming more into higher soul and primordial mind, with much more focus on the higher good and on that binding force of love, and how our spiritual home can really be right here in our earthly home.
Yeah.
As we learn to consolidate, every bit of it is about one existence. And it doesn't have to be, dissonant in any way.
Yeah.
We can certainly have a certain amount of harmony and resonance, and grow through this kind of exploration, and through our dealings on a daily basis with our other humans, and with our animal friends.
Yeah. Love is the answer.
Absolutely. I guess John Lennon, the Beatles, Dionne Warwick, they all said that back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Love is all we need. All the world needs is love. Well, they were right.
They were
And
right.
that's exactly where the near-death experience community today would be screaming in affirmation. Yes, love is the answer. So hit the nail on the head.
Thank you so
Amazing.
much.
Well, my
Yes.
pleasure. Thank you all very much. And I'm sure we can talk again sometime. And I hope your project goes very, very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just keep me
Thank you.
posted.
Appreciate
Let
that.
me know how I can help, okay?
Right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you,
All
Evan.
right. And my best to Bruce. Pass
I
it
will,
on.
yeah, I'll send him your love and your attention. Maybe we'll get you
Ab-
guys together on a call or something soon.
That'd be great. All right. Y'all take care.
Okay,
Take care.
you too.
Talk
Thank
again
you.
soon.
Thanks, Doc.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Cool. That was
Cool,
great.
right?
No, great.